before you scroll away. Before you think this is just another message on the internet. Pause for a moment, because what you are about to hear may explain the very night you thought no one in the world could hear you, the night your chest felt heavy, your eyes burned from holding back tears all day, and when the darkness finally surrounded you and everyone else was asleep, you let the tears fall in silence, believing no one saw them and no one cared. But what if I told you that night was not ignored, that moment was not wasted, and those tears were not invisible, because the truth is the night you cried alone was witnessed in heaven, every tear was counted, every whisper of pain was heard, and every broken thought that crossed your mind reached far beyond the quiet room you were sitting in. You might remember that night clearly, the stillness of the room, the weight in your heart, the thoughts racing in your mind asking questions you could not answer, wondering why things had fallen apart, wondering why people had hurt you, wondering why the plans you trusted suddenly collapsed, and maybe you even asked God a question you were afraid to speak out loud, asking if He had forgotten you, asking if your prayers were disappearing into silence. But here is the truth many people discover only later: the quietest nights of pain are often the moments heaven is paying the closest attention, because pain has a way of opening a door inside your heart that nothing else can open, and when that door opens, something deeper begins to happen, something you cannot see yet. Something that is slowly shifting the direction of your life even when you feel completely lost. You may not realize it now, but the very night you cried alone was a turning point that your future will one day look back on and understand, because those tears were not weakness, they were a signal that your heart had reached a place where transformation could begin. And the world often teaches people to hide their pain, to smile when they are breaking, to pretend everything is fine even when their soul feels exhausted. But heaven does not respond to the masks people wear during the day. Heaven responds to the honesty that comes out in the middle of the night when your defenses are gone and your heart finally speaks the truth. That night when you cried, something sacred happened in the silence. Because while you thought you were completely alone, the truth is your pain had an audience beyond what your eyes could see, and every tear carried a message. Every tear said something words could not explain. Every tear was a prayer even if you never spoke a single sentence. And there are moments in life when tears become the most powerful language your soul can use, because they reveal the deepest parts of your heart, the parts that are too heavy for words and too complicated to explain. And those are exactly the moments when heaven listens the most carefully. Think about that night again, the thoughts running through your mind, the memories replaying themselves over and over, the questions that had no answers. Maybe someone you trusted had walked away, maybe a dream you believed in had collapsed, maybe the pressure of life had finally reached a point where you could not pretend anymore. Whatever the reason was, you felt like the world had gone quiet around you and the loneliness felt overwhelming. But what if that silence was not emptiness? What if it was preparation? Because sometimes before something new begins in your life, everything around you becomes quiet so that your heart can hear something deeper than the noise of everyday life, and those quiet nights often become the beginning of a story you cannot fully understand yet, because the truth is many people who later experience the greatest breakthroughs in their lives can point to a night when they felt completely broken, a night when they cried until they had no more tears left, a night when they believed nothing would ever change, and yet somehow that moment became the seed of a transformation they never expected, because pain has a strange way of clearing the space for something new to grow. And while you may think that night was just another painful memory, Heaven may see it as the exact moment your story started shifting in a direction you could not see yet. Because when your heart breaks open, it creates room for something greater than the life you were trying to hold together on your own, and there is something powerful about the honesty that appears when you stop pretending to be strong, when you stop trying to carry everything alone, when your heart finally admits that it cannot fix everything by itself. That is the moment something deeper begins to move, something invisible but powerful. And many people do not realize that some of the most important changes in their lives begin on the nights they feel the weakest. Because those nights strip away illusions, they remove the distractions, and they bring your heart face to face with what truly matters. The night you cried alone may have felt like a moment of defeat, but in ways you could not see it was actually the moment your heart stopped running from the truth and started searching for something real. And that search always begins in silence. It begins when the noise fades and your heart finally asks the questions it had been avoiding. Questions about purpose, questions about direction, questions about whether the life you were trying to build was truly meant for you, or whether something greater was waiting beyond the plans you had lost. And that night may have been painful, but it was also honest, and honesty is the beginning of transformation, because when your heart becomes honest it becomes open, and when it becomes open something new can enter, something that could not reach you while you were busy pretending everything was fine. And there is a reason so many spiritual awakenings begin during moments of deep emotional pain, because pain forces your heart to pay attention in a way comfort never does. Pain makes you stop, pain makes you question, pain makes you look deeper than you ever did before, and sometimes those questions lead you to answers you never expected. Answers that slowly rebuild your strength in ways you cannot see immediately. And if you think about your life carefully, you might begin to notice a pattern. Many of the strongest people you know did not become strong during easy seasons of life. They became strong after nights of quiet tears that no one else ever witnessed. Those nights shaped them. Those nights forced them to confront the parts of themselves they had ignored, and those nights planted seeds that later grew into resilience, wisdom, and a deeper understanding of life. And the same may be happening with you even if you cannot see it yet, because the night you cried alone was not ignored. It was recorded in a way you may only understand later. Every tear carried a message that your future will eventually decode, and one day you may look back and realize that the night you believed everything was falling apart was actually the moment something greater was beginning to form beneath the surface of your life. A shift that started quietly, slowly, almost invisibly, but powerfully enough to change the direction of everything that came after it. And even after that night passed and the morning eventually came, you probably wiped your eyes, took a deep breath, and stepped back into the world as if nothing had happened, because that is what many people do when they carry silent pain. They return to their routines, they answer messages, they speak to people, they go through the motions of life while hiding the storm that passed through their heart only hours earlier. And the strange thing about those nights is that the world rarely knows they ever happened. No one sees the tears on your pillow. No one hears the quiet prayers that barely formed into words, and no one realizes how close you were to feeling completely overwhelmed. But just because the world did not see it does not mean it meant nothing. In fact, some of the most important moments of your life will be the ones that no one else ever witnessed, the hidden nights when your heart wrestled with fear, disappointment, and exhaustion, because those are the moments when something deeper inside you begins to awaken. And the truth is, many people underestimate the power of a single night of honest tears. They think it is just sadness passing through, but often those nights are the moments when your soul releases burdens it has been carrying for years, burdens that were never meant to stay inside you forever, and sometimes those tears are the beginning of healing even if they feel like weakness at the time, because when pain finally leaves your heart through tears it creates space for something new to enter your life. Something that could not grow while your heart was holding on to so much pressure, and that is why the night you cried alone was not ignored. It was a moment of release, a moment when your soul stopped pretending it could carry everything and finally admitted it needed help, and there is something sacred about that moment of honesty because it opens a door between your heart and heaven that pride and self-reliance often keep closed. And when that door opens, something begins to move behind the scenes of your life. Changes that are quiet at first but powerful over time, and you may not see those changes immediately. You may wake up the next day and everything still looks the same problems, the same people, the same unanswered questions, but what you cannot see is that something has already shifted inside you. Something small but important has begun to move, because pain has a way of waking up parts of your spirit that comfort keeps asleep. Pain forces you to look at life differently. It forces you to reconsider what truly matters and what does not, and in that process something remarkable begins to happen. Your perspective starts to change, slowly at first, almost invisibly, but steadily enough that over time you begin to realize you are not the same person you were before that night, because those tears were not just emotion, they were transformation beginning in the quietest way possible. And many people discover later in life that the nights they cried the hardest were the same nights their heart began to grow the most, because growth rarely begins during the easy moments of life. It begins during the moments when your heart feels stretched beyond what it thought it could handle, when you feel forced to face truths you tried to avoid, when you are pushed to the edge of your strength and realize you cannot keep living the same way you did before, and that realization becomes the seed of change, because once your heart sees the truth it cannot go back to pretending. And even though the process may feel slow, even though the answers may not arrive immediately, something inside you has already started moving toward a new direction, and one day you will look back and understand that the night you cried alone was the beginning of that shift, the moment when your life quietly turned toward a path that would eventually lead you somewhere stronger, wiser, and deeper than where you had been before. And even if you cannot see it yet, the truth is your tears were not wasted, they were heard, they were counted, and they carried meaning far beyond what you realized in that moment, because every tear carried a message that your future is still being written, every tear carried a prayer that did not disappear into silence, and every tear carried the beginning of a story that is still unfolding. A story where the pain you felt becomes part of the strength you will one day walk with, part of the wisdom you will one day share, and part of the purpose that will guide you forward even after the darkest nights have passed, because the truth many people discover later is that the nights they thought were the end of their hope were actually the beginning of something far greater than they imagined. And as time slowly moves forward, you may begin to notice something that you could not understand on the night you cried, something subtle but powerful that starts changing the way you see your life. Because the truth is, pain has a strange ability to reshape a person's heart in ways that comfort never can, and the night you believed you were completely alone may one day become the very memory that reminds you how strong you truly are, because those tears were not simply a moment of weakness but the beginning of a quiet transformation that was taking place deep within your soul, and many people never realize how close they were to a breakthrough because the moment right before change often feels like the moment when everything is falling apart, when your heart feels tired, when your mind feels overwhelmed, when your faith feels fragile, and when the silence around you feels heavier than ever before. But history is full of people who discovered later that the darkest night of their lives was actually the doorway to a new chapter they could not see yet, because when life strips away the things you thought you needed, it sometimes reveals the strength you never realized you had, and that strength begins to grow quietly after the night of tears passes, slowly rebuilding your heart piece by piece even when you do not notice it happening, and one day you wake up and realize you are not reacting to life the same way you used to. The pain that once overwhelmed you now teaches you, the silence that once frightened you now strengthens you, and the loneliness that once broke your heart now reminds you that you survived something that once felt impossible. And this is how transformation often works. It begins in hidden places, during silent nights, during moments when no one else is watching and when your heart is wrestling with questions you cannot answer yet. But those moments are never meaningless because they shape the person you are becoming, and the truth is the night you cried alone planted something inside you that will continue to grow long after the memory of that pain fades. Because every tear carried a piece of your story forward, every tear carried a release that your soul needed, and every tear created space for a deeper understanding of life that many people never reach until they have faced their own breaking point. And one day you may meet someone who feels exactly the way you felt that night, someone who believes no one understands their pain, someone who believes their tears mean nothing, and in that moment you will realize why you went through what you went through, because the strength you gained from surviving that night will become the light that helps someone else through theirs. And suddenly the pain that once felt meaningless will reveal its purpose, because the truth is the strongest compassion is born from the people who have cried in silence and still found the courage to stand up again the next morning. And that is exactly what you did, even if you did not realize it at the time. You stood up again, you kept moving forward, you kept breathing, you kept living even when your heart felt exhausted. And that quiet resilience is more powerful than you know, because every day you continued moving forward after that night proved something important about you. It proved that your story did not end with your pain. It proved that your heart still carries a strength greater than the darkness you faced, and it proved that even the nights when you feel most forgotten can become the foundation of a future you cannot see yet. Because the truth is your tears were never invisible, they were part of a moment that heaven noticed even when the world did not. And one day you may look back at that night and realize something surprising. You may realize that the moment you thought you were completely alone was actually the moment you were being prepared for something greater than the life you were trying to hold together before. Because sometimes the plans that break your heart are the same plans that clear the path for something stronger, something deeper, and something far more meaningful than what you lost. And that is why the night you cried alone was never ignored. It was the beginning of a chapter that is still unfolding in your life, a chapter where your pain becomes part of your strength. Your tears become part of your story, and your survival becomes proof that even the darkest night cannot stop the light that is still meant to rise in your future. And as you continue walking through life, there may come a quiet moment when you finally understand something that once felt impossible to accept, The realization that the night you cried alone was not simply a night of pain but a moment that carried a deeper meaning than you could see at the time, because life often hides its most important turning points inside the moments we wish we could erase, and the truth is many people spend years trying to forget the nights that broke them, only to discover later that those nights shaped the person they eventually became. Because there is something powerful about surviving a moment. When your heart feels like it cannot take any more weight and yet somehow it continues beating, somehow you wake up the next day and life keeps moving, and at first it may feel like nothing changed, the same responsibilities, the same faces, the same unanswered questions still surrounding you. But deep inside something has already shifted, something subtle but real. Because when a person cries alone in the darkness, it often means they have reached the deepest level of honesty with themselves, the place where all the distractions disappear and the heart finally faces the truth about what it feels, what it fears, and what it hopes for even after everything seems uncertain. And that level of honesty is rare in a world where people are constantly trying to appear strong, constantly trying to convince others that everything is under control even when their heart feels fragile. But the night you cried was a moment when that mask fell away and your soul spoke freely without fear of judgment, and there is something sacred about that kind of honesty because it opens the door for healing to begin in a way that pretending never could, and even though you may not have realized it then, that moment was the beginning of your heart slowly rebuilding itself in a new way, because pain has the ability to strip away illusions and reveal what truly matters. It forces you to see the difference between what was temporary and what will remain with you no matter what happens next, and sometimes that realization is the first step toward discovering a deeper purpose for your life, because when your heart has been broken open it begins searching for something real, something lasting, something that cannot disappear as easily as the things that once made you feel secure. And that search gradually changes the direction of your life even if you do not notice it happening right away. Because the lessons born from quiet tears are often the ones that guide you long after the pain itself fades, they become part of the wisdom that shapes your decisions, the compassion that changes how you treat others, and the resilience that keeps you moving forward when life becomes difficult again. And one day you may find yourself standing in a moment of peace you never thought you would reach, a moment where your heart feels stronger, calmer, and more grounded than it once did. And in that moment you may suddenly remember the night you cried alone and realize something that once seemed impossible. You may realize that the person you are now could never have existed without the pain you experienced then, because the strength you carry today was born in the silence of that night. The wisdom you now hold was shaped by the questions you asked when no one else was listening, and the compassion you now feel for others grew from the tears you once believed were meaningless, and suddenly the memory of that night will look different. It will no longer feel like a moment when you were abandoned or forgotten but a moment when your story quietly began changing direction, because sometimes life must break the version of you that was trying to survive the wrong path so that a stronger version of you can rise and walk toward the future that was always waiting beyond your pain. And when that understanding finally arrives, you will realize that the night you cried alone was never ignored. It was a moment when heaven witnessed the honesty of your heart. A moment when your pain was seen even if no one around you noticed it. And a moment that became the beginning of a transformation that continues shaping your life even now, because every tear carried meaning, every tear carried release, and every tear carried the quiet promise that your story was not ending in that dark room but continuing beyond it in ways you could not see yet. And as long as your heart keeps moving forward, there will always be new chapters waiting ahead. Chapters where the pain that once made you feel broken becomes the very proof that you were strong enough to survive it and wise enough to grow from it. And that is why the night you cried alone will never truly be forgotten, because it was the moment when your heart proved it could endure darkness and still continue searching for light.